So one of the questions that came up while we were learning last week, some of the Chavra asked me afterwards, okay, so we've explained a decent amount how the events of the 6 days of creation are leading up to the creation of man, and the events thereafter don't necessarily bother us in terms of the timeline of things. It could have been 1,000 years, it could be 10,000 years, it could be 100 million years. Nobody's entirely sure, scientifically speaking, meaning there's a lot of questions that we still have with regards to science. None of that makes too much of a difference backwards or forwards with the way that we learn or read. The Chumash is not interested in teaching us chronology or history. Amen. Torah is interested in teaching us what we need to know about the way that creation is, was, and operates. Okay, good. So the shaila is, and this is an interesting question that arose. What about the dinosaurs? This comes up from time to time. It's also fun because kids love talking about dinosaurs. It's like one of those curiosities that every kid can like name half a dozen dinosaurs. They cannot,
tie their shoes.
They can't tie their shoes. They can't tell you like birthdays of their siblings. Like all of a sudden dinosaurs are like this fascinating thing, and this has somewhat become a fascinating controversy in recent years with regards to hardcore Christian philosophy, whether or not dinosaurs are real, or if this is a hoax, or if this whole thing was made up. Or I think the biblical museum that they have like somewhere in Utah, they have like Noah in the ark with dinosaurs, which is very Labor Dick. Definitely makes for a different experience of being in the Teva. But the question still remains: what do we do with this? What do we do with the fact that we have fossils of dinosaurs that are millions of years old? We have nothing like that today. Nothing like that. So one could argue that not a problem. There were dinosaurs at some point in time during this would be standard general sort of methodology that the fifth day of creation was a couple million years, and in those millions of years were dinosaurs that lived and died out, and that was part of the Bria. That was part of the existence of things. That there were these gigantic things that died. Nope, beseder gamer. Although one then has to ask, like, well, why? Why were they there, if not for any particular function of mankind?
So we'd have fuel today.
Right. That's fossil fuels, right? Which is one of my favorite little tidbits of information is that plastic is made out of petroleum, which means that plastic dinosaurs are made out of real dinosaurs. That's right. Toy dinosaurs are made of real dinosaurs, which is good news. But the shadow still remains. Like, well, why are they there? So it's worth noting that there have been those that have argued, and as far as I'm concerned, this is one of my professors of philosophy, and why you used to refer to these kinds of things as dark philosophy. That all of this is he was a religious guy, religious Catholic actually. That this was all some kind of hoax that HaKadosh Baruch Hu put into creation that was there to test faith. There are those that make such arguments. This is not unrelated to the idea of brains in a vat, right? The one philosophical theory that no one can disprove is simulation theory, meaning that we're all in the matrix, that none of this is real, that this is all a figment of our imagination, that we're all plugged into some kind of machine and our energy is being harvested for something. You can't disprove it. There's no way of disproving it, right? Because you're in it, right? You can't disprove a system from within. That's impossible. Like a computer program can't prove that it's a computer program because it is. You can't disprove that. It happens to be that this has some interesting and fundamental nafkaminas with regards to the questions of faith and logic in general. One of the things that becomes very interesting to talk about just in general, this is what in computer science was referred to as the bootstrap problem. When you turn on a computer, it's called booting up your computer, right? What's it called booting up your computer? you boot up your computer, because this is a age-old problem called a bootstrap loader problem. A bootstrap, you can't pick up yourself by your bootstraps, right? That becomes impossible. You can't pick up yourself. You can pick up someone else. Something from outside of you can pick up you. So this is this is an age-old program in computer science. Is when you turn on a computer, you want it to load an operating system. How does it load an operating system? The operating system is software that is on a disk, that is on some piece of physical material. How do you get it to load itself? It can't load itself. That is the problem of booting up. So the only way to do it is to hardwire something into another physical piece of the hardware that has a physical program into it, meaning a circuit that is programmed into it that says, go to this drive and run this. That's called booting up your computer.
Nowadays, it's instant.
Right, but
it used to be not.
But it still runs on that.
Yeah. I'm just saying it used to be so much more.
It used to be much slower.
Now
yeah.
You touch a map with the time.
Turns it on, right? But it still has.
It's still happening.
It still has some piece of hardware that tells the software to turn on.
Right. We've lost the visual relay.
Correct. But that problem exists within all fields of study in general. There is a challenge within the world of logic. Everything in the world relies on, meaning all of our proofs for everything rely on logic, correct? Like if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C, right? Property of, property of transference. That's a logical problem. That logical problem is solved because it is logical. Now, here's a weird question. How do we know that logic is true? Meaning all proofs are built on logic. But the system of logic itself is not provable logically. Because the system of logic is a system. To prove that logic is true relies on intuition. Correct. Right? You can't prove anything that is outside of its own system. It's the same as the question of asking, like, what was there before time? Well, there wasn't a before time. That
in a system of time.
Right. You can't, what happened before time began? I don't know. That's nonsensical.
But that's interesting because there's a couple areas in Torah where like time stops. Like Yeshua, Avram is brought out by
it's an interesting question. Nowhere in all of Torah does time stop. The sun doesn't set, but time still continues. I mean, the celestial spheres are paused, but time itself is good, which is interesting because space does move. Meaning, we have certain miracles, like Aron Einoi Min Amida, that the Aron Kodesh in the Kodesh HaKadoshim in Yerushalayim took up no space. But when the Kohen Gadol went into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, it did take up time. But the Aron doesn't, meaning space is something that we do finagle with somewhat. Time, we don't. Time marches on at a pretty consistent clip of 1 second per second, right? That is the rate of the passage of time. So space does contract and expand, but time doesn't.
10 almost on each side and 20 on our
yeah.
We're learning here in the shir. And then tomorrow we can go for a run.
Mm-hmm.
For 30 minutes we can think about the shir. Is it still continuing tomorrow?
Well, so
you could hit replay.
Yes.
Word for word too. But I mean, on certain levels, right? We can, if you think about a conversation you had with, it's still somewhat continuing, and there's a time and space element there.
Your arms are right, but you don't see in any of the miracles in the Torah that time stops. Right? I mean, you see, Yeshua stops the sun and the moon. The Medrash says that when Yaakov was traveling to leaving Eretz Yisrael, so the sun set much earlier, so it would force him to sleep at the Makam HaMikdash. Meaning, you have certain things like that. What?
The journey of the Jews in Egypt getting faster places that they wouldn't have gotten there as quickly.
So we have kfitzas haderech. We have certain things where
You're saying it's a contraction of
yes,
distance.
yes.
Instead of
Space gets smaller, but time doesn't, and how that messes with or doesn't mess with Einstein's theory of relativity is a great question. Meaning that it seems to be very clearly that there definitely were certain contractions of space that occurred.
That exists in actual space too, like hyperspace and whatnot.
Right.
Think of it like a carpet that's laid out like a big rectangle.
And then,
You
right.
pull it in a little bit,
Yeah.
contract that. But
Yes.
time changes the distance.
Just the time that it takes to cross it will be shorter or longer. It happens to be that this seems to be, whether this is literal or not literal, it seems to be that there were certain pathways that existed in the days of the Beis Hamikdash for people to get places much quicker than they ordinarily would have thought. It's a Mishnah in Machshava that the Talmud Yerushalmi discusses with regards to. I was looking into this a little while back with regards to the tunnels under the ground. Meaning today people are talking about last year we've been talking about tunnels a lot. Our enemies were not the first people to invent tunnels. We had tunnels a long time ago. Let's go back to see inside. What?
We did some tunnel tours over.
So a couple of years ago, there's a fun story about this Yerushalmi. I took a group of NCSY kids to Eretz Yisrael. This is like probably 16, 17 years ago, and we were hanging out. Randomly met a guy in the old city that was a donor for like art scroll things, whatever. I was in Smicha at the time. He said to me, "What are you learning?" I said, learning Smicha. He said, "Do you ever learn Yerushalmi?" I said, "Yeah, I open up Yerushalmi from time to time." He's like, "Would you like a set of art scroll Yerushalmi?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" The guy was like the primary donor for like the art scroll Yerushalmi. Sent me a set. I came home and I found a set of all the Masechtas that I had like 15, 16 years ago of the Talmud Yerushalmi of art scroll. It was just fun matana. Like randomly just sent me an art scroll Yerushalmi. So to that holy Jew, Givaldic. So there's a Mishnah. There's a Mishnah in Maseches Ma'aser Sheni. Yeah, the Mishnah says that Kerem Revai, with regards to the fruit, the grapes that were in the 4th year. So you have to bring those to Yerushalayim. Ole Yerushalayim, they have to be brought to Yerushalayim. You can't redeem them. You have to bring them to Yerushalayim, and you have to bring them to Yerushalayim if it's mahalach yom echad l'chol tzad, meaning if you are within a 1-day journey of Yerushalayim, you have to bring your produce from your vineyard to Yerushalayim. And then the Gemara, and then the Mishnah discusses, well, ve'eza hitchuma, what is the boundary of this area that applies for this particular halach? Meaning, what is within a 1-day journey of Yerushalayim? Says the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Elat min hadarim, Elat from the south, is within a 1-day journey of Yerushalayim. Ve'akravas min ha-tzafon, and Akravas from the north. Velod min hamarav, and Lod coming, the city of Lod coming from the west. Va'yardim min hamizrach, and the Jordan River from the east. That's basically the whole of modern day Israel. It's apparently within a 1-day journey of Eretz Yisrael. That's interesting. Of Yerushalayim. That's interesting. And then the Mishnah continues. Mishiraba appears when the fruit became too much. Is kinu sheyu nifte samach lachema. They decreed that you were allowed to redeem it. You could pay for its value, even if it's right close to the city walls of Yerushalayim. V'tanai, but it's a machlokes in the Tanaim. Sorry, the Tanai it was it depended on a particular stipulation. You needed to have a particular condition. Okay. The Mishnah then discusses, there's details to discuss. The Gemara then discusses what these boundaries were. The Yerushalmi tells an interesting story. The Yerushalmi says hold up a second. We've just said that Eilat and Akravas and Lod and the Yarden River were a one-day travel from Yerushalayim. Says the Mishnah, says the Gemara, Hada Pliga al Nakai. This contradicts the story of Nakai. Who is Nakai? We don't know. The Yerushalmi doesn't tell you exactly who this Nakai fellow is. Why? Nakai have a shamish b'migdal tzivaya. He was a shamish. He was an attendant. He worked in the Beis Medrash of a place called Migdal Tzivaya. B'chol aruvas shuva min dahava avid kandilai. Every Erev Shabbos, he would set up his candles. Erev Shabbos. Vaves solik Shabbos bebeis Magdasha. And then he would go to Yerushalayim, go to the Beis Hamikdash, and put a Tchum Shabbos there, meaning he would put some food there so that he'd be able to walk the whole area in between. V'nachit umadlik laim, and then go back to Migdal Tzivaya and light candles there. Meaning, Migdal Tzivaya apparently was much further away than any of these places. Much further away than any of these places. Where exactly Migdal Tzivaya was, seems like it was a long way away. Somehow or another, he would prepare his candles Erev Shabbos, then he would go to the Beis Hamikdash and then come back. That means that it is less than a day's journey, which messes with the whole geography. The Gemara, the Yerushalmi, then tells you a different story related. It says, "V'ista Amran Sefer Hava." Now, those that say that this fellow was not Nakai, was a Sefer, meaning Nakai literally means a cleaner, sweeper. He was a guy that kept the Beis Medrash clean. There are those that say that it's Sefer Haya, that he was a Sefer. Bechol aruva shuvsha hava salik pshat sidroi lebeis hamikdash. Every Erev Shabbos he would go and he would teach Torah in the Beis Hamikdash. V'nachis Shabbos bebaisei, and then he would come home and he would make Shabbos in his house. Meaning, Erev Shabbos, he would finish teaching, he would go to the Beis Hamikdash, he would give a shir there, and then he would come home. Doesn't make any sense. That's two options in that story. Then the Yerushalmi says a third story, or maybe those are the same story, and this is another one. Then you have Tartiroi de Mahalul, have a Salik Shabbos Legai Beis Magdasha. You have Tartiroi of a place called Mahalul, would go and spend the whole of Shabbos in Yerushalayim, in the Beis Hamikdash. V'lo have a barnash paretz lete'ene kadmoi bine, and nobody was around to harvest the figs in the morning before him. Meaning, he somehow or another spent Shabbos in Yerushalayim and then got back home in time to harvest these figs on Sunday morning before anybody else. Somehow or another, he traveled very, very quickly. That's story number 2. Story number 3. Benos Tzipori, the girls of Tzipori, which is by the Kinneret, that's very far north in the country. The girls of Tzipori have a Salikan Shabtun Begoy Makdasha. They would go and they would spend Shabbos in the Beis Hamikdash. V'lo have a barnash karetz lete'ene kadmoi minihen, and nobody picked figs earlier than them on Sunday morning. And you have another story of the girls of that kind of area, the Benos Lod, which makes it even more complicated because Lod was one of the places listed in the Mishnah that apparently would be able to go backwards and forwards in less than a day. How? The girls of Lod, Benos Lod, they would knead their dough to make challah. They would go up to Yerushalayim. They would daven in the Beis Hamikdash, v'yordos ad shelo yachmitzu, and then they would make it back before their dough had even risen. That seems pretty quick. Says the Gemara tells another story here. Says the Gemara, maybe we'll tell that story another day. Says the Gemara, Michlal de Pliga. It seems like there's a contradiction between all of these stories. And our Mishnah says the Gemara, no. Va'afilu teimar leis hava plig. You could even say that there's no contradiction. Mechilos hayu v'nignazu. There were tunnels. That there were during the times of the Beis Hamikdash, v'nignazu, and those tunnels were hidden. Meaning they were like wormholes. That somehow or another you would be able to leave Lod You would mix dough together. You would leave Lod. You would show up in Yerushalayim. You'd come back. Quick, chick chuck.
So those things at the airport.
Right.
People movers.
Yeah. Yeah. So many of the Rishonim deal with this question, like, is this literal? Is this figurative? Like, what exactly is going on here? There are those that argue that maybe like these tunnels were legit tunnels underneath the ground that were like very wide and very smooth, and like people could travel there very quickly, and a bullet train style, that they had some kind of technology that existed that could get them very quickly from Lod to Yerushalayim. I mean, in theory, you could make it 18 minutes from Lod to Yerushalayim if you had a
track.
Right? It's possible, right? In theory, you could.
It's possible.
In theory, you could have such a thing. Whether this is literal or not quite literal is shtickle unclear. But it's interesting to note that at least the way that Rashi learns in Maseches Chagiga is that these pathways still exist, and the Tanaim after the Churban Habayis would still prepare the Trumas and Meisteres b'Tahara with the hope that Eliyahu Hanavi would come and show them the pathways to get from where they were to Yerushalayim to bring it, because they knew that there were pathways that were not Tameh. There were some pathways that were hidden, that they knew of, that there were these pathways, they existed. Where exactly they were, unclear. Now, that Gemara in the Rashi in Chagiga don't say that there were tunnels, but that there were shvilim, there were pathways. Apparently, there were ways that people knew how to get from place to place. The story that we didn't read is a tragic story, which is also mentioned in at least with some differences, in the Medrash in Eicha, that there was a man that was in Eretz Yisrael, and he had an animal that was running away from him, and he chased after it, and he arrives in Bavel, like turns around and he's in Bavel. And they said to him, "Where are you from?" And he said, "I'm from Eretz Yisrael." And they said to him, "How did you get here?" He says, "I was chasing after my animal." And they said to him, "Where did you how did you get here so quickly? When did you leave?" He said, "The day that you left." "How did you get here so quickly?" He said, "I just followed this pathway over here." And they looked for it and they couldn't find it. Meaning that these pathways that would take Jews to and from Yerushalayim very quickly apparently could take us out of Yerushalayim very quickly as well. And we couldn't find our way back exactly. Now,
maybe used when the city is sieged.
In theory, they could.
Because you would think back in history, then if they needed an escape,
it
could have been used to get everyone.
Now,
it doesn't seem like for that purpose now. Just
yeah, so it's interesting. This might or might not be related to what Chazal speak to us about a number of places. What they call the Kvitzas Haderech. That Eliezer, this comes up in 2 weeks' time. Eliezer Eved Avram experiences Kvitzas Haderech. That he leaves from Eretz Yisrael and he arrives in Haran, Ur Kasdim, that same day. Yaakov Avinu leaves Yerushalayim, and he leaves Yerushalayim and he gets to the well that day. Meaning that this Kvitzas Haderech, it's a question of whether that means that there were pathways to travel very quickly, or that the land contracted, that was possible as well. What's very clear is that Chazal certainly understood that there were possible ways of traversing large distances in short spaces of time, but these are all miracles of time, of space, not time. Right? That's the one thing that we seem to know with certainty, is that all of these things are movements within space, not within time. Okay, so back to our question of dinosaurs, right? Which is a little bit how we got onto this. Good. So it is possible, maybe, that there are those that argue that this whole thing is some kind of a hoax. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu did this to test our emunah in Hashem. This is dark philosophy. Practically speaking, everything HaKadosh Baruch Hu created in this world, he created. Good. No. So what's the purpose of having these dinosaurs? What exactly is the deal? When did they live and when did they die? And if this is all true, why doesn't the Torah speak about them? Why doesn't the Torah speak about them? The first thing to point out is that obviously the Torah doesn't speak about dinosaurs because the Torah did not have the word dinosaurs. Dinosaurs is not the Hebrew word, right? Dinosaur is not a Hebrew word. But the Torah does speak about something that sounds like could be dinosaurs. What does the Torah speak about things that could be dinosaurs? So it's interesting to point out that nothing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created, none of the animals, not a single one of the animals, or any of the vegetation, anything on planet Earth, does Hashem seem to create specifically. Hashem creates general things. Yeah? Hashem, meaning, except for Adam and Chava. Says the Torah,
let there be animals, not zebras. And
right.
So Hashem didn't specifically create birds or.
Oh, we did.
Of course. So then that's specific.
Right, but Vayomer Elokim Tacha Aretz Desha, that the world should sprout vegetation. Esav Mazriya Zera, grasses that spawn seed. Eitz Pri, fruit trees. Oisa Pri Lemina, making fruit of their kind. Asher Zara Al Haaretz Vayiche, that's going to spread seed over the world, and it will be so. And then the Torah says, Vatotza Aretz Desha. That the world now produces these fruit trees. Doesn't say apple trees and orange trees and right? Meaning there's no specific anything. So where did all the specific things come from? Where did all the specific things come from? So this is important. This is the Baal HaTanya. He speaks about this. Where's my Tanya? Somewhere here. Okay. The Baal HaTanya explains that this is what's called, when we reference this when we talk about evolution, that this is called the Hishtalshelus. The Hishtalshelus meaning the spawning of different things from those things. Meaning, HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates the world. Totzea Aretz Desha. The world should create Desha. From those words of Hashem, Totzea Aretz Desha, came every single different kind of vegetation. Every different kind of vegetation. How? Totzea Aretz Desha. From those words, Eitz Pri Oseh Pri, from all of that, through the Reish Lamed Aleph Sharim, through all of the different possible combinations and permutations of letters, every letter spawns forth other letters, came everything in existence. So, for example, we have different ways of letters being related to other letters. Atbash is one of them, right? Atbash is Aleph can switch with the Shin, and Beis can, Aleph switches with Taf and Beis switches with Shin. You have Atbash is one methodology. And then you have Gematrias, where certain groups of letters equal other groups of letters. Certain letters equal other letters, right? Like Aleph plus Beis equals Gimel, right? 1 plus 2 equals 3. So you can have, also you have what's called the miluim of letters. We spoke a little bit about this over Shabbos, that you have the miluim of different letters. So the word Aleph is, the letter Aleph is also the word Aleph, which is spelled Aleph, Lamed, Fe, right? And the Lamed is spelled Lamed Mem Daled, and Fe is spelled Pei Yud Aleph, or Pei Hey, or Pei Aleph, or Pei Hey, right? And there's different ways to spell, and this continues, right?
But you're explaining the mechanism and then saying that God didn't specify that, but God is all knowing, so obviously He understands the mechanism, so He's still there playing before, knows what He created.
Correct, absolutely. Now, here's the interesting point: is, well, isn't this infinite? How come are there an infinite amount of species on planet Earth, or a finite amount of species? Finite, right? But yet these letters could continue forever, right?
Definitely, but also they always find new.
Right, this is new stuff that we find all the time. So this is where Chazal explained that HaKadosh Baruch Hu manifests in this world with different names. One of the names of Hashem is Shakai, Shin Daled Yud, which means Sha'amar Le'alamai Dai. We said to the world, enough, means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts a cap on where it goes to. Were it to be that everything that Hashem created in this world was infinite, nothing would be meaningful. Meaning, if there were infinite different kinds of vegetation, and there was infinite water, and there was infinite land, and infinite planet Earth, and infinite species, then nothing would be meaningful. Everything would be infinite. Everything would return to nothingness. Meaning, in order for anything to be meaningful, it needs to have limitation. Otherwise, it just folds into the infinity of things. infinite everything is nothing.
Which is everything.
But it's meaningless. Meaning there's no way of making meaning out of, if everything in the world is infinite, then right. This is if there's infinite people that live for an infinite amount of, none of that makes any sense. That's not a world that we would be able to contend with. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts caps on the world. That's called shakai. She'omer le'olamo dai. But the point is that what HaKadosh Baruch Hu created was categories, and from those categories, all the things that come from there, which we explained 2 weeks ago. Rav Kook explains to us is the spiritual process of evolution. That things evolved from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. We know this in Torah and in Kabbalah and in Chassidus. And Darwin came along and said, Taka, it's true in biology as well. Mazel tov. Shkoyach. Excellent. Meaning the mechanism that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, b'dvar Hashem Shemam Nasa, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke the world into existence. Okay, so from the speech of Hashem came all of the different things that Hashem created. Yafeh me'od. And from all of those things that Hashem created, good. So now we know how everything rolls out. A couple of scientists came along and they said, Taka, we think that we found that there's a relationship between this species and that species. Good. And then in the grand tree of life, that all vegetation are related to each other. Good. We know this from the Torah as well. Tetzeh ha'aretz deshet. The world should sprout vegetation. Excellent. And then the Torah says that Hashem created the sun and the moon. Those were specific things. Those are specific creations. We do have those things specifically. But he didn't tell you any names of any stars or any planets. He just said sun, moon, and stars. And then you have all of the species of things in, on, and under the ground. That the world should teem with all living things. And birds should fly over the land. In the face of the heavens. And now you have something interesting. This is the only thing that would seem to be a specific creation. Hashem created the great Taninim. What are the great Taninim? Yeah? What are the great Taninim? So we spoke about this this medrash. Rashi quotes this, the Ramban quotes this medrash, that this is the Leviathan that Hashem is going to pickle for the tzaddikim. But pshat in the psukim. Now, what is a Tanin? So this is, if you take a look at the beginning of Sefer Shmos. So Moshe Rabbeinu comes in front of Paro, and there's this show that he does in front of Paro, where he has a stick and he throws it into the ground and he picks it up and it turns into a snake. So there the Torah seems to interchange between the words Tanin and Nachash, right? Tanin and Nachash. Where Rashi there tells us that Nachash is a kind of Tanin. What are the Taninim Hagdolim? Big reptiles, literally. That is the translation of the words. Hashem created the giant reptiles. It seems to be that the same way, this isn't a specific kind of animal. It seems to be that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created gigantic reptiles.
Right.
It's right there in the psukim. Meaning he made these gigantic reptiles. They're there.
So, and this is all great, but why was it initially the Havamina was so heretical to say that Hashem created dinosaurs? Like there was a period of no,
never.
All you didn't agree that.
So
dinosaurs.
So this is
the way that it's explained now.
Yeah.
Is so obvious. Yeah. All circles of Judaism agree with
so
this. Like, where's the controversy?
So the controversy is really more evangelical than it is Jewish. Meaning, if you don't accept that the universe could be older than 6,000 years old, and the existence of gigantic reptiles that lived millions of years ago is antithetical to your supposed belief system, so then now you have a problem. But we should point out that throughout the ages, Chazal spoke about gigantic animals and gigantic people.
People say the waters when the flood of Noah was so hot that potentially could have aged the bones.
100%. That's entirely possible. The same way that if you have an atomic bomb, meaning the ground in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the fossils that are there of the people that were killed, look to be much older. If you put them under whatever the thing is that like carbon dates things, they seem to have aged way more than the 75 years, more, right? The 80 years that they've been in.
Isn't it simply true that there wasn't one complete dinosaur?
Um,
Isn't that still true?
I'm not sure if that's true.
Like a fossil.
Maybe.
They don't have one complete dinosaur.
Maybe. I'm not sure. But it's for sure true. By the way, it's for sure true that dinosaurs existed, right? Meaning, that's not a question. Did they exist? Yes. Do we know everything about them? Definitely not.
So that was, I was interested in that question too. I also thought that there was definitely
Right.
I don't know.
It comes down to the 6,000.
or something that
Right.
That's the
that
answer.
didn't believe in dinosaurs.
No.
The answer was the 6,000.
Right. Meaning, if you think that the world was created 6,000 years ago and no more, then you have now you have to try to figure out, okay, so then how did it come about? So maybe you could answer, that during the flood there was a cataclysmic event that wiped out the dinosaurs, and it was so hot that it destroyed all of those things, possibly, which is potentially one avenue of looking at things.
Test of faith, like you said.
Or test of faith, which again is dark philosophy.
But still,
But Pshat v'Yivra Elokim es hataninim ha'gedolim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created these gigantic taninim. Kol nefesh hachaya, remeses ha'asher she'artzu'amayim leminehem, and all the things that creep and crawl and swim. Ves kol oif kanaf leminehem, and all winged things. V'Yivra Elokim tov, and the Bereshit saw that it was good. I mean, it seems to be Pshat in Psukim that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created dinosaurs. Like that's what it says. So no, not such a big problem. If that's true, then you have to ask the question. Well, did we know that this was always the case, and what happened to them, and why did they disappear? Meaning, why did they disappear? This is an interesting question. No, what do you say? Why did they disappear? They would have eaten us. Why would they have eaten us? That's not nice, right? Meaning,
Or like a chicken popper. I don't know.
say what? Right,
Like,
Right, what are you going to do? Maybe. Learn that.
Maybe this was just something like a little. Well, I don't know. You're not really supposed to say that, right? It's how could something get a little too, right? Like we have lions and tigers now that could eat people, but that's not
Right.
why dinosaurs cause us such, because they're so huge.
Right, and gigantic, majestic, enormous things.
Even maybe what you were saying, Rabbi, how Hashem didn't create a specific thing, so if it's more general and then something pops out that's like an anomaly, wouldn't it make sense then for Hashem to
this is
Destroy it?
all before the creation of man.
like
Yeah, but
it didn't fit with, I don't know, didn't fit with the
okay, so there are those that suggest this is the Machshava and Bereshit and the Gemara Maseches Chagiga that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is banei olavos v'machrivan, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is creating worlds and destroying them. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu is creating worlds and destroying them constantly, and that maybe that is within the world as we know it. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates worlds and destroys them, and that is the building blocks for fossil fuels for today. That was the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. That he has a couple million years of dinosaurs in order that human beings should be able to make iPhones, which I mean it's certainly not untenable. Certainly not an untenable solution that this is how HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to create the world. There are those that argue that banei olavos v'machrivan means talking about the Big Bang and the destruction of stars and breaking into heavy metals, and that there is destruction that begets more creation.
But Hashem specifically promises us that he's not going to destroy.
He's not going to destroy the world anymore.
Implies he has destroyed the world.
Right. Well, he did during the days of Noach.
Yeah.
Whether he's going to.
Well, I'm saying like the back and forth.
Right. I mean, maybe there were more worlds that were destroyed before that. Maybe there are more. Now, in Kabbalah, there's a lot that they speak about that. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is banei olavos v'machrivan. That's the secret of the Shivrei Kelim, that the light of Hashem that shatters the vessels, and leaves parts of godliness for us to collect throughout the world and throughout our thoughts and activities, and maybe throughout the cosmos and the universe, that there's godliness for us to collect. And humanity has a lot of work to do for the next couple bajillion eons of time to maybe that's also a possibility. But Pasha says, and this is fascinating to point out, is that it's very clear certainly in the Midrashim, and it would seem to be pshat in the Psukim, that there were some very, very big things in the world before the flood.
Oh.
Big people like Og, and big animals like dinosaurs, and we have a remnant of this even in the days of Moshe Rabbeinu. What do you have this in the days of Moshe Rabbeinu? Well, Og was still alive then.
The matters of the frogs, that big frog.
Oh, okay, so there were, but even later. You remember that the spies went to Eretz Yisrael. V'sham ra'inu es hanefilim, b'nei ha'anak.
Yeah.
We saw the descendants of the giants that lived there, right? Exactly what the Nephilim are, the Bnei Anak, exactly what those are. But Pshat is the gigantic people. V'hayinu be'enhem kechagavim. And we seemed to be like grasshoppers in their eyes. We were tiny, they were gigantic. They brought back fruit from Eretz Yisrael. Huge fruit. Took 2 guys to carry a bunch of grapes. Huge fruit. How do you have such huge things? Well, so firstly, Chazal tell us that Eretz Yisrael was not affected by the Mabul. So maybe that's where the gigantic things continued to live. Maybe there were still gigantic things that were there. Og Melech HaBashan was still there. How big was Og?
Moshe jumped and with the staff hit his ankle.
So the Medrash says that Moshe Rabbeinu was 10 amos tall, which is larger than, even the Tau brothers, right?
The staff.
Right, and his stick was 10 amos tall, and that's a serious vertical right there,
and then
right?
And then he hit his ankle.
He hit him in the ankle, which means that Og's ankle was 30 amos off the ground. That's a big ankle. That's a very big ankle. Now, unless he was strangely disproportioned from the ankle up, that means that he was a very large fellow. Now, exactly how big he is, it's interesting. Nowhere, anywhere in Chazal do we know how big Og himself was. We don't know.
That's the only mention of the size.
So the pasuk says that his cradle was gigantic as a baby, or his bed was gigantic as an adult. Exactly, Eris. That's his bed, his cradle was gigantic. But exactly how big Og actually was, we don't know entirely. That he was huge, yes, we know that he was huge. How huge? Don't know. Unclear, but that he was very big is for sure true. Moshe Rabbeinu kills him, for sure true. Chazal tell us that Og was very ancient. Og was from the days before the Mabul. He survived. How did he survive the flood?
He sat on the table.
No, he hung off the side of the teva, right? He hung off the side of the teva where the waters were cool surrounding the teva. It was hanging off the edge of the teva, and he apparently ate a lot, right? He was, chowing fish the whole day because the fish were hanging around there. Okay, Pesach Gomer. This, whether or not these midrashim are literal or figurative, they're for sure true. They're trying to tell us something, and there is a enormous lesson here in the enormity of things. Is that there were some very, very big things. Let's see if I have this Maharal here. Yeah, the Maharal points out that Og was gigantic. He shows up before the Mabul, I mean, in the days of Noach. But he also shows up last week's parsha, Parshas Lech Lecha, in the days of Avraham Avinu. Where does he show up in the days of Avraham Avinu? In the War of the 4 Kings and the 5 Kings. Where does Og show up? No? Lot is captured, yes? Somebody comes to tell Avram that his nephew has been captured. Who is the person that comes to tell him? Og. Vayavo hapalit, the refugee came. Vayaged la'Avram ha'ivri, told Avram the Hebrew, Ivri, the one on the other side. He was hanging out in Elonei Mamre, the plains of Mamre. Ha'emori of the Amorites. Achi Eshkol va'achi Aner behemet bali bris Avram, the part of the people that are in the covenant with Avram. Who is this palit? This gigantic guy. So this refugee. So on this, the Medrash tells us that this was Og. Og was the one that came along to tell Avram Avinu that that Lot had been captured. Now the Maharal has a fascinating mahalach. This is the Maharal in Gur Aryeh in Bamidbar. He says, "V'al yehei lecha sofek." Do not be confused. Ki kach og begadlus shaloi, kach gadol me'od me'od. That Og was gigantic. He was huge. He was very huge, super duper huge. Rak shehu gashmi, but his gadlus was in physicality. He was physically very, very big. Uvishvil kach, because of this, Haya Yori Moshe Rabbeinu was afraid of him. Moshe Rabbeinu was afraid when he's going out to fight with Og. Sharei Hashem amar elav al tira ki be'adcha nasati. He said, don't be afraid of him. I've given him into your hand. Ve'ein omrim al tira ela l'mishu misyari. Don't say don't be afraid except to somebody that is afraid. Right? Right? That's it's like when you go to somebody and be like, don't get angry. Don't get angry. You only say don't get angry to somebody that's getting angry, right? Usually it doesn't work. Then he quotes the Gemara in Masechtas Nida. Why was Moshe Rabbeinu afraid of Og the giant? So he quotes the Gemara in the end of Masechtas Nida. Maybe Og had on his side the schus of Avram Avinu, the merit of Avram. Why? Because Og was the one that came and told Avram that his nephew had been captured. He was the one that had survived. He was the refugee from the generation of the flood. He survived the flood. Gewaldig. One should be astounded, says the Maharal. What? Now you're questioning that Avram's merit should stand for Og, but not for Avram's own children. Why is Moshe Rabbeinu so afraid? But just because he told Avram that his nephew Lot had been captured, and that because of that Avram won the war and rescued Lot. Like, why shouldn't this save his children? It says, "Aval davar ze haya muflag ma'od, ki Og haya min ha'anakim." This was something very astounding, because Og was one of the giants. Va'avram nikra Adam gadol ba'anakim. And Avram Avinu is referred to as Adam gadol ba'anakim, a great man amongst giants. Shikach darshu chazal, this is how the Medrash in Shmos Rabbah explains, how Adam gadol ba'anakim ze Avram. Avram was the giant amongst giants. V'chashav Moshe kevan shehu mischabros la'og im Avram, since clearly there's some relationship between Avram and Og. They have some connection to each other. Because he's coming to tell him that his nephew has been captured. Og is connected to the world of Kedusha. Og is plugged into the history of the Jewish people. And the fact that he's fighting with the Jewish people, maybe this is an internal machlokes. Maybe Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't have the right to take him on. He says, Ki midas Avram hagdul, because Avram is gadlus. Gadlus means midas hachesed. L'cha Hashem hagdula is midas hachesed. That's the whole world of Avram. Avram was a giant. It says, Misham mekablim ha'anakim koach hagadlus. And from there, the giants get their giantness. They draw down the chesed of Hashem. Uvishvil ze nikra Avram Adam hagadol ba'anakim. Avram Avinu is the greatest amongst giants. V'chashav Moshe ki yesh la'og davar mizeh gamkein. Maybe Og is also from the world of Avram Avinu. He's a big bal chesed. He's a giant. That's why he's so big. שיש דמיון לכוח דמיון לכוח Avram. Maybe he has the same kind of strength as Avram Avinu in giantness. Shua koach kodesh, which is a transcendent strength. Meaning, Og, who is a giant, maybe we should be concerned that his hugeness comes from the fact that he's embodying midas hachesed. We feel kacha yarim, Moshe Rabbeinu is afraid. Aval ein ze kach, but this wasn't true. Ki af im haya oikis chabris al Avram b'mesh mitasay hagdola shemisham mekablim ma'anakim. Even though he drew from that wellspring of chesed, which is gadol, ayakoach Avram koach kodesh eloki. Avram's power, Avram's strength came from a place of transcendence. Aval oig ene rak koach gashmi. Og translated that into enormity in this world. And we explained this a few weeks ago, that every midah exists on multiple planes. You can be rich in money, and you can be rich in ruchnis. You can have light in photons, and light in intellect, and light in spirituality. All of those things are things that are light. Enlightenment, the intellectual enlightenment, is also a kind of light. And we spoke about this, I think the first week of the Machshava Chabura, that you could have a gold bar that is translated into this world as a legit gold bar, or that it is schar in olam haba. Olam haba, gold is infinite spiritual reward, translated into this world, and it's a piece of gold. Right? It's a piece of metal. It depends on where you are holding and what madrega you are living on. Says the Maharal that Og Melech HaBashan was enormous because he took gadlus and translated it into hugeness. Because the greatness of Avram is the greatness of Hashem. It's called great. Aval Gedulas Og, who Godel Guf Bilvad, he was just a big body, huge dude. Without having any godliness to his greatness, to his hugeness. It says, this is wondrous for a person that understands it. Meaning, what he's explaining is that there were giant things in the world that came from the world before the flood, called the world of chesed. This is Olam Chesed Yibane. Because Baruch Hu creates the world with chesed, which meant that all of these things translated into huge, huge things.
Which is why the fruits in Israel were big.
Huge, huge stuff. What's the kunz of having stuff that's so huge? So the Sforno points this out in Parshas Nach and in Kavanas HaTorah. Big things live a long time. That's true today, right? Blue whales live for
300-400,
a couple hundred years, right? The
turtle, big turtle.
right, those huge turtles, those gigantic squid, right? They live a long time, right? Giant redwoods, right? Can live for thousands of years. The smaller something is, the shorter it lives, right?
Even car engines.
Right, true, right? So the smaller something is, the less koach it has to live a long time. Before the flood, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, Olam Chesed Yibane, created the world in such a way that things would live a long time. In fact, things were supposed to live infinitely. Death comes into the world as a result of the sin of Adam and Chava, which means that now death exists, but still people are going to live a long time. A long, long time. What are they supposed to do with this enormously long life? To fix stuff. To fix, right? Meaning death comes into the world, as Frana explains, because you need to understand that you can't mess things up internally. You have to fix things. And knowing that there is an end means that people will be pushed to do things. The problem with having no end in sight is that you get to the world of the Mabul, which was people lived a very, very long time, so they could delay fixing anything and everything. Just a big deal. The Mabul changes all of that. After the Mabul, everything becomes much shorter. all lifespans become much shorter. The people that were born before the Mabul, they still live a long time. Noach lives another few hundred years. His children live a few hundred years. His son, Shem, who's also known as Malki Tzedek, lives a very long time. There are people that live a very long time. It's still possible to live a very long time, but it's not normal. Because the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has now made the world is that people are smaller, everything is smaller. And since everything is smaller, lifespans are going to be much shorter, which means that you don't have enough time to mess yourself up completely and then fix up everything entirely. You need to know that time is short. Get to work. And so you see, everything becomes much smaller after the Mabul. And seasons are now part of the reality of things. You don't just have this infinite period of growth that you sow seeds and they grow and they keep growing and keep growing and keep growing. Now there will be seasons. So the Torah says that there's going to be summer and then it's going to be fall and then it's going to be winter and then it's going to be spring, and you will feel the passing of time. You're going to feel this passage of time, and that's going to galvanize humanity into doing something with their lives. But Pashtus is, it would seem to be, that before the flood, there were giant things. People were big, fruits were big, and animals were big. They were Taninim Hagdolim. The only place that we still have gigantic creatures today is the seas, because they weren't affected by the flood. Right?
I mean, still, as long as it wasn't too hot in there.
Say what?
As long as it wasn't too hot.
Right. So Chazal say that around the Teva, the waters were cool enough that the fish could survive. So, like, the largest animals in the world today live under the oceans. That's where gigantic things still live.
The elephants just need to cut.
Right, they just made it. Just made it. But the gargantuan birds, that winged things that existed beforehand, we don't seem to have today. Although the Midrashim do speak about these things. If you take a look at the Gemara's Rabba Baruch and Baba Basha, now those things are all also at least allegorical, but they could be literal. Then Yaakov writes that when Chazal speak about gigantic snakes and gigantic birds and gigantic beasts, so the Yaakov writes, Nafkamina is if somebody takes a shua that they saw such a thing, we don't necessarily say that it was a shua shav, that it was a false oath, because they did exist. How you dvarim ha'olam? They did exist.
Some people see the Loch Ness monster.
Maybe. I mean, it could be, right? I mean, these things for sure did exist, and Chazal were aware of them. And for a long time, there's a long drush, the Drush Arachaim, that were written by the Tiferes Yisrael, by in the commentary on the Mishnayos. So he says that this was in the mid 1800s when people were discovering these things, that Chazal had described the enormous birds and beasts and for thousands of years. And non-Jews used to laugh at the crazy Jews that believed in these fanciful stories of gigantic beasts. And all of a sudden, they discovered dinosaurs. They're like, huh? He's like, yeah, okay, we knew that they were big stuff. No. They were gigantic things that existed. So why did they stop existing? Because now everything becomes smaller. Everything becomes smaller because lifespans are going to be shorter. But did the dinosaurs exist? Absolutely. Did they exist in the days of humanity? Arguably, yes. And most likely, they were destroyed in the days of the flood. And that these things seem to have aged exceptionally at some point in time. Now, possibly. Or alternatively, they were in the fifth day of creation, and that fifth day was a couple million years old. And Adam Machshava never encountered the Taninim Hagdolim. But either which way, these are things that for sure are irrefutable in terms of the archaeological and Paleolithic discovery. We have no problem believing that they existed. And does the Torah speak about them? Yes. I'll share with you one final medrash, which just might make things really interesting. is that it might well have been. I mean, the Tananim Hagdalim had a specific kind of tanin, it would seem, like she says in Shmos, which is the nachash. And the Medrash says that before the Chet of Adam and Chava, the nachash could speak. I mean, the Psukim say that the nachash could speak, and the Medrash says that each person would have two nachashim that had legs and could speak, and would they were in the service of humanity. Each person would have two. One would run to this side of the world, one run to that side of the world, and do all the things that you needed it to do. They seem to be very intelligent beings. And that after the Chet of Adam and Chava, so then HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes away the legs from the nachash and now it slithers and crawls around. Arguably, what Chazal are referring to is that that one of the things that humanity was charged with doing was taking control over these super intelligent large reptiles and making them work for us. Maybe that was part of the plan, is that we were supposed to have dinosaurs in our employ. Could be. Again, are these midrashim literal or are they figurative? Right? You can work with however you want to understand it. But that Chazal understood that for sure, that they were walking hyper-intelligent lizards, yes. There's no problem with saying that Chazal knew about dinosaurs. And no problem in saying that they were very smart. No problem in saying that Adam and Chava were aware of them. And no problem in saying that they existed on the fifth day of creation, and that was millions of years. No problem in saying that they died before the existence of Adam and Chava. No problem in saying that humanity was gigantic beforehand and has now shrunk since. All of these things are possibilities. Meaning, you can go to the Museum of Natural History, and it should not share with your emunah and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in your emunah in the Torah at all. But at the very least, it should give us a sense of humility, of understanding that the world is much bigger than we understand. That by Hashem is Baruch, it's going to get big again, and it's got to be continued.
Yeah.